All right, everybody. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Notes from the Aleph. An Aleph is a high point from which all things are visible, and from our vantage point, we'll be looking at tabletop role playing games, their design, and the theory behind those designs. Around here, our motto is to be fair, build up, and have fun. I'm your host, GriffinVarro, joined by our editor Theta, our local designer Norman Rafferty, and our good friends and GMs, RedRabbit and Robert Grosso. Around here, when it comes to playing tabletop games, I have 15 years of experience running, playing, and frequently fixing problematic rule sets at the table. Pronouns he, him, they, them. Red, why don't you go second?
Hi, Red here. I run our Iron Claw game on Wednesdays, and now I'm playing in our Forbidden Lands games on Sundays. Very excited about that. I'm a lover of a myriad of different game mechanics when it comes to tabletop gaming, and I also love a good story. So, for that reason, I consider myself both a student of narrative and of game design.
Rafferty, why don't you go next?
I'm online. Hello, world. I'm Norman Rafferty, he, him. I work for Sanguine Games. If you make it to First Squared in the month of April, when this is aired soon enough before April 14th, you can find me there. That's my next convention. Hope to see you there.
All right, and of course, Robert.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rob Grosso, he, him. I am my day job is I'm a college professor, but my night job, I run the Pathfinder game on Wednesday nights on the Ractus channel, play in the same Forbidden Lands game as RedRabbit, as well as upcoming Shadowrun on this channel, and I also write for the website techraptor.net. I wear a bunch of other hats, but I feel like I'm plugging too many things at once.
Plug them away. That's what the introductions are here for. Tell everyone what you're about, man.
Twitch.tv/partygoblins.
Oh, Party Goblins. That's a wonderful name. All right, so as for today's topic, a lot of our talks here have often been about the rules and how to create them to be sturdy in the face of interpretation, push players in the right direction, and generally be easy for everyone to pick up to use. However, when we're playing at the table, we don't always consult these rules first and follow them perfectly. We improvise, and often to make the conversation at the table move faster or simplify down something our audience of players are having a hard time with, we'll just kind of gloss over those or make something up. So today, we're going to actually be talking about the contrast between the rules and following them rigidly and improvising at the table. So, I feel like I know who's going to complain about this the most first. Why, Rafferty, you seem to be over there, harboring a grudge against following rules rigidly and improvising.
I don't.
Amazing.
We just did a big podcast on talking to the players, and I think we all agree that the best games are the ones that meet or exceed the player's expectation. Because you don't have to, like I worry in this age of performative and streaming that you're doing stuff to try and impress the world and like your thousands of viewers because you're going to become an influencer. Now you only have to impress the players who are at the table. And so, as a designer, I've been waging that war for years now about how people don't know the rules to their own game. That's why we have a book, and you have to look it up. But because people know the game they play, and they'll come back and quote that to you. But like we always, the Monopoly rule is one we complain about. Everyone thinks they know the rules of Monopoly, and no one does. Right.
Remember, everybody, free parking means that you get money for some reason. And extends the game out an extra 50 hours.
If you land on a property and don't buy it, it gets auctioned off and everyone else gets a chance to buy it. That's one of the, right. There's all this stuff that people don't know about. And it's not to say that you're playing it wrong, but it is to say that if someone shows up at your table and you told them, we're going to play Tunnels and Trolls today, that's a loaded statement because it's not, you might as well be saying we're going to play poker or we're going to play charades or something. It's like, just because you said we're playing this game, we need to know the unwritten rules about what you're going to do and a lot of etiquette. And that's why we talked about session 0 and setting the ground up. So, and also in the previous stream, I just talked about the huge problem you're going to run into is that that's a loaded statement. Everyone has a different interpretation of what an elephant is. Everyone, just because you say we're going to play Dungeons and Dragons today, that doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. And that's where your arguments are going to come from. because everyone agrees you're supposed to improv and make rules changes and fiat and that kind of stuff, but no one agrees on what you should change and what you shouldn't, or, well, very few people do. And so I don't mind improving and changing the rules. I've already admitted that I do it, to make the game go smoother or in the player's favor. It's like I keep saying, it's only a problem. Sorry. The problem you're not having is not a problem. If what you guys are doing at the table is working for you, I've met Rifts players. If it's working for you and you're all having fun, then it's great. You should only worry about rules if you're not having fun.
All right, so there we go. So
Bullshit.
I know us. Yeah.
A kinder, gentler Rafferty.
A kinder, gentler Rafferty.
What have you done with Rafferty, you bastard?
Where is he? What pod do you have him in? So
We want to get
one
the
of the things I
sponsors,
think.
No,
it's because I'm here, because we're kind of on the same wavelength a little bit.
So let me go ahead and throw some instigation here. Let me throw some heat. So Rafferty, in the past, we've had the complaint from you that people at the table will be playing a different game than, of course, is in the book, and will then tell people, "Well, I played X, but it's not like X at all." And so we should be writing games the way the people are playing them. But at the same time, we do have people who are improvising and coming up with things on the fly. Do you feel that these statements are maybe contradictory? Or do you think that maybe just in the act of playing, you're just going to be making stuff up anyway?
well, they are, but like, how do you fight this? Like, if because people will say, like, truthfully, Dungeons and Dragons is improv. Critical Role or playing Dungeons and Dragons, sponsored by Hasbro. It's if people say, okay, the game is improv. I mean, this is where the issue is in the details. We all agree that the game should have a high element of improv. Okay, and we all agree that it should be what the players want. The devil's in the details. It's like there's a big controversy right now of, should we really be saying all orcs are inherently evil? I mean, doesn't that rub some of us the wrong way? And it's like, well, yeah, but you could just improv out of it. And but then people will say, no, should the book even say this in the first place? And that opens up the can of worms of, the book is endorsing things. It's like people complain, D&D is full of murder tourists. By the way, we've defined all of you as penniless social outcasts. Here are all your combat abilities and ways to offend people.
Exactly.
And nothing, right? We don't start you with any social ties or conflicts or, like all that backstory stuff we just talked about in a previous podcast. That's not in D&D. That's optional in D&D. You must choose how you kill people, because when you start your character, there'll be a list of, do you kill with 2 swords or with 1? That you must tell us that, but backstory is optional. So it's a mixed message. I mean, that's why I'm arguing that the problem is you just throw people into the deep end of the pool. You're telling them, go improv, go have fun with this. We're not going to tell you how to do it, and then on top of that, we're going to throw a bunch of fuel on a fire. We're going to throw gasoline that is full of all the stuff we told you not to do. And you're supposed to somehow know this is bad.
Where I think that hairline fracture comes, and the big disparity that you're talking about, is the issue between the game and the experience. You know what I mean by that? Like the game of Dungeons and Dragons, or the game of Vampire, or the game of Ironclaw, whatever game we're picking here. Here's your rules, as you always like to say, here's your rules on how to play make-believe. And it's more or less, this is how you hit, this is how you roll, this is what your armor class is, this is how you murder more, murder better, murder with spells and fire and ice and lightning, oh my. And then it's all story on top of that is kind of grafted on afterwards. A lot of the books, they have a separate book for that. It's the Game Master's Guide. You know what I mean? Like, it's like it goes into...
Then, the Game Master's Guide is going to have like a paragraph that says, improv and read your players. Now here's how to build a stronghold. And here's rules for guns.
Exactly. It's like hodgepodge. It is an intermix of everything. I'm a big... Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I'm a big fan of improv. And
Well, I was gonna pick my favorite whipping boy for this. The king of mixed message games, Shadowrun. Because you guys have all played that, right? I know Rob has, right?
I have in fact attempted to run it before.
I
Okay.
played.
And the reason why I say that,
I played a few years ago, and it was not that fun. But that was like a fourth or
right? Okay.
sixth edition.
And I say it's the king of mixed messages because the title of the game is Shadowrun. You are a shadow runner who runs in the shadows. We have, and keep a straight face for this, Griffin.
Mhm.
We have hired you because we need a subtle criminal who can commit an operation and not antagonize or get the attentions of authorities. And you are highly skilled at avoiding attention and the authorities because you are a shadow runner.
There are
Then you
some
go to play the game.
technicalities here I could defend with, but I don't care to.
I mean, it's the title of the game. Now, I haven't played, like, they're on what, 6 now?
Yeah, they're
I
on
mean,
6.
you played a more recent edition. Do
Yeah.
they have like formal rules or a section in the book that describes what to do when the players set off every alarm in the building and the cops come? Do they have rules for anything than just start a fight with the cops? Do they have anything?
Not precisely. It does have advice in the 5th edition book of like, hey, there should be response teams for stuff and things happening. There are 2 mechanisms I think that are at play. The first is you do have street cred and notoriety, things that actually matter to your character and go across things. So if you continually cause problems, ostensibly your notoriety rises and people are more aware of you and have an easier time finding you because you're so obvious about it. So everyone knows. The other thing is that technically you do exist in the shadows because you have no social identity at all. You aren't a part of any nation, you aren't a part of any corporation, and so they don't actually have any files on you to find anything about until you start causing crimes, and then they investigate you for them.
Right.
Those would
the
be the
first
tools I would say that are on the table that are the most prominent in pushing it back towards its actual message.
Right. I mean, the usual issue I have with that is these games, especially like crime games, is they don't know what to do if you commit crime. Because, like you said, like there's no bonus for avoiding stuff. They don't give you an experience point bonus. They don't give you a karma bonus for avoiding attention. I mean, they could. It's right there in the title, Shadowrun. Instead, the only thing they do is they say, okay, more people know about you. What does that mean? I guess it means more combat.
Yeah. Ostensibly, it means the more combat you do, the more combat
because it's not going to get you denied from the adventure. They're not going to say, okay, as a shadow runner, you're too notable, so we're not going to hire you. They wouldn't say that. And that's what I'm talking about.
That is technically within the text.
Does it say that?
It says, yes, if you have too high notoriety, people might say no to you.
Okay.
But...
Well, okay, so that's, and like I said, and speaking, and also the real I want to point that is, speaking of that, like speaking of game doesn't give you the tools. Okay, so what would this actually happen? You sit down to a game and say, you guys, I'm going to run a Shadowrun adventure today. Sorry, Griffin, you can't come because your character has too high of a notoriety rating and they won't hire you. So you have to sit there and do nothing while we play.
Right. That's the but right here. It's like, are you going to actually exclude some from play? Are you going to exclude the whole party? What do? You're here to run the adventure.
Right.
You run an adventure where no one can actually participate.
And that is exactly what I'm talking about, where the game needs to give you actual tools you would actually use at the table. That's why I'm always talking about no bad players, only bad games. I know people say, they're really bad. It's this, the game says, hey, there's a rule right here. It says notoriety. You as the GM are supposed to punish them. And so, like, everyone would agree with me that, like, okay, sitting at the table and saying, okay, you have to, have a different, did we say you should have multiple characters in case one's notoriety is too high? Like, is that something we expected? The adventures have firefights that take place in the street, some of them scripted. Sometimes you can't avoid this. Like what I'm talking about is, like, the game itself doesn't reward that behavior. In fact, it has the opposite. It turns you into a bad guy. And that's what I'm talking about as the enemy of good game design. design.
But this is also where
Game
improv
shouldn't
can
be
come back
written in such a way to say, our game is fine, here's a bunch of rules. Well, but we shouldn't be presenting you with a bunch of stuff, and then, by the way, if it doesn't go this way, you need to be put in a socially awkward situation where you have to tell a player they are no longer allowed to have fun in the experience. And then that turns it into a player versus human. And all because, the game sent the opposite message. They let you buy rocket launchers through the catalog. They let you be a troll with a giant cyber arm. They have spells that blow up entire city blocks. And they don't give you any bonuses for being subtle or distracting and that kind of stuff. And everyone hates the hacking sequences because they're boring. It's like, that's the king of mixed messages in the games.
I think this does give us a good bouncing off point to when you really do need to improvise, because there aren't necessarily rules for it. I don't think a lot of games actually have specific rules about what should you do to your players when they break laws or rules. Instead, very frequently, there's literally no expectation of consequences. You do have to improvise that to some degree and figure out what's going to happen here. Like, obviously, Shadowrun, they should have it, but in D&D, there's no text on it.
Well, yeah, like D&D, because usually the only tool they give the player is, have someone show up to arrest them. So in other words, a combat encounter.
Start a fight.
And that gets you to a feedback loop of someone started a fight, it got out of control and raised their notoriety. So people showed up to arrest them. That starts another fight and gets out of control. And I've already talked about like Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto solves this problem because Grand Theft Auto does the same thing, except in Grand Theft Auto, two things. You don't get points for killing cops in Grand Theft Auto. You get points for doing the mission storyline. Cops and stuff are a distraction. They give you a very simple mechanic of, here's stars in the corner, get rid of these. And then you go get rid of them because getting in those stupid firefights in Grand Theft Auto is a nuisance at best. It's not fun. And so
right, and I'll go ahead and tell you, like every single GTA game, you will come to a point where you're like, I want to do a mission. You lightly bump something, and then the cops are after you, and you have to spend 5 minutes trying to get rid of them. And it is the worst experience.
Well, that's bad design. I'm talking about how the star clearly communicates this is something you don't want. And then the other thing is, you can just fucking get killed in GTA. I mean, they just write wasted on the screen, and then, okay, but you're in a hospital and you lost some money. In other words, they will just crush you and then put you away, which is not something you can do in a game like D&D or, God forbid, Shadowrun. I mean, D&D has revolving door death, but in a game like Shadowrun, once again, bad tools. In Shadowrun, we were telling you, okay, death is a threat. If you get shot and killed, you will die. Here are some police. They're shooting at you. So, and players don't always understand surrender. I've complained about this before too. They don't know. They weren't told, okay, if you surrender, you can get out of this relatively pain-free. We'll just take you out of the game for a bit, take some of your money. Some players don't understand that, and some players won't do it. Surrendering is losing. I'm a troll with a big shotgun, cyber end, or I've got toxic waves. And that's what I'm talking about with bad tools. The game is written to talk about notoriety and being subtle and that kind of stuff, but then you play it and there's all these rules for laser cannons and guns. There's very little rules for subtlety, and then there's scripted adventures that don't have it. All of that is bad design.
But improvisation can actually make that better design if it's used well on the end of the GM in a lot of ways, and also with the understanding of the players involved in that. Take, for example, the notoriety for Shadowrun.
But improv
doesn't fix the problem, but it could at least mitigate the problem. That's the thing. Mitigating the problem is usually the best you have there.
Well, I'm agreeing with you that a good game master could get out of this, but I'm arguing from the designer perspective. Why did the game put us in this shitty position in the first place? It takes mental energy to tell a player, you're doing this wrong. This is why I complain about the Mercer effect. This was the Mercer effect. I could threaten to fire you. I'm going to take you off the show and stop paying you money. So do what I want.
My players.
Well, in real life, that would be more of a social issue, and it would be awkward because they would, as awkward as it is to fire people, but it's even more awkward here. I can't just edit out your scene. Like we talked about that before, it would be awkward. And once again, you're in the position where the player, like when we get into improv, like I agree, you can improv your way out of it, but I want to ask, how did we get in this? The game put the idea in my head that I'm a troll with a rocket launcher, because troll was an option and rocket launcher was an option. Okay, so I'm improving based on what the game said I should be doing. Like, and like, this is a contrast where I would think that a stealth game wouldn't have rocket launcher as a starting option. You would think that would be, somewhere else. Like a game like Blades in the Dark, which handles it a little better, puts heavy weapon in a separate category. Right. And implies that if you bring a heavy weapon, you're bringing at the expense of other things and improving and lowering your profile, which you may not want to do. In fact, they make you choose a profile before the adventure starts, which is supposed to keep you from doing that. But that's an example of the rules working with it. Like I'm agreeing with you, Rob, that you can improv your way out of it. But why were we here in the first place? Who put this idea in your head?
To go ahead and free Rob from the rhetorical question, I have a question for Red. And so this will be a vampire question, and this has to do, of course, with what's on the table. So, yeah, prepare for it. All right, I come to your game with a venture, and I say...
You did it, not me.
Yeah, I come to your game with a venture, and I say, I'm going to start dominating literally every single person I have on the street and creating an army.
I wish someone had done that. None of my players have put any points in dominate, and I'm like, guys, I keep throwing situations.
I'm doing it, by the way. The game I'm going to be doing soon.
Oh, good.
Okay.
But the problem immediately comes to me of like, all right, so are you going to personally track every single person in the city that I've come across, their exact status, how deep they are, and what commands they have on them? Are you going to do that?
Okay, I feel like I'm trying to be trapped here. The reality is that I probably... Okay, I want to say that I would.
Shouldn't would be the question.
Probably shouldn't, but I think that I would, like, to some degree. I don't know the extent you can abuse dominate. I don't know if you can have armies, but to me, that game is all about... The beauty of that game is that its mechanics generate drama through character interaction. So
I want to interject
here. I'm
real quick.
asking a very physical question, I think.
I
want to handle the information.
I want to use a different example that's probably more germane.
Sure.
Because I'm agree with Red of like, well, this is a game about doing that kind of stuff. No, the bigger question that I put to the table is, okay, let's go back to the whipping on Dungeons and Dragons, because I've complained that Charm Person is a ubiquitous spell. It's first level. I have had people who never played D&D before who ask, "Can I throw fireballs?" Because I want to throw fireballs as my character. It's the first thing they ask me. I have never had a new player show up at my game and ask, "Can I compel people's will?" They don't ask for that. The Charm Person is right there. It's on both the cleric and the wizard list. So even healers get it. And it immediately says in its text that you cast this on someone, they become your friend, you get your way, and then after it wears off, they hate you because you compelled them to be your friend against their will. So it immediately sets up what I'm calling a toxic situation, that you cast on someone, if they fail the saving throw, you get your way, and then they hate you. And if they fail the saving throw, they hate you because they know you tried to charm them and they hate you. So this is a recipe for derailing the game. And what I hate about it is because if you were a player and you showed up at the game and you had to pick your spells, after you slotted a magic missile or whatever, you'd say, well, what can I do other than kill things? Well, I could jump really high. I could, or I could compel people's minds. And you would many players would look at that and take that because it's a problem solver. And if you're playing a social game and they use that, I mean, on the one hand, that's what I'm talking about. Like, once again, the improv thing. It's like, okay, this spell immediately makes an NPC hate your guts forever. Improv.
Yeah. The one time that I was the problem player, it involved a charm person or a friendship spell.
The one time.
I was only
Yeah.
one time. It was a moment of weakness. And I didn't know that merchant was a slod, so that's on the module, really.
Oh no.
Oh, Jesus.
So Rafferty, I think you definitely like attached onto like a good thing there, which is like derailing the game. But I think what was on my mind is information overload, where you're inclined by the rules to particularly track individual things happening. But after a certain point, if you're at a table and you're doing it by hand, nobody wants to do that.
Well,
I think that's a point where
remember-
improvisation comes into play, and you go, "We need to abstract this out more than the book declares it should be."
Oh my god! I don't think I've complained on the stream about the spell that drives me nuts in D&D 5.
Oh, boy.
Animate Dead.
Exactly. That would be an example there. Tracking it particularly is a possibility, and you can do it. And I know Theta loves it,
well,
but abstracting it would be good.
It's hugely complicated because, I mean, like, if you're watching our Ironclaw game, Red has risen to the challenge, and also our players are pretty good about controlling entourages because we have a huge entourage, which, as I keep emphasizing, is small by classic D&D standards. Like, entourages in D&D were huge, and barbarians could raise a horde of hundreds of them.
Mhm.
But in D&D 5, they have that spell, Animate Dead, which not only gives the player 5 extra full-fledged combatants that they can use on the table at minimum, because you can do more than this. But it also has a weird mechanism where you have to rememorize the spell and cast it because it expires exactly 24 hours later.
Yeah.
So players have to go through this juggling match of I need to rememorize the spells and recast them at the regular 24-hour intervals without it. Which also, since most games don't track the clock, that's not actually an issue, but it makes you wonder why that's actually a thing in the game.
Right, exactly. And this is the point where I think I wouldn't throw down a challenge. I want to say D&D, go back to like 1st and 2nd edition and just straight up give the necromancer like 50 skeletons every level. Just straight up do that. No conditions. Just that's your ability. Like the fighter gets his henchman, give the necromancer some skeletons. Just
but
do
who says they didn't do that back in the day with 1st or 2nd edition?
That's what I'm saying. Bring it back. Do it.
Well, let's stop and do, like, Pathfinder, since it's based off of D&D 3, has solved the problem. They say, here's the hit die limit.
Yeah.
Say if you are like it's twice, you can only control this much. Done. Whereas D&D says you can control an infinite amount as long as you keep recasting the spell every 24 hours. Get out a spreadsheet and a day planner and write down exactly when you're memorizing this. And remember, if you fall off schedule for any reason, some of these undead, I forget if they crumble in the dust or wander off. I think they crumble in the dust now, right?
No, they actually just stand there and attack whatever moves next to them.
Yeah, they become uncontrolled skeletons.
Well, they'll become uncontrolled. So if by any reason you have to, like, recalculate your slots for any reason, and also, by the way, let's not forget, this means you're also showing up with fewer spell slots. And, like, in other words, in theory, you could do this, but I have to mention, like, one change from here's a cap on hit dice to infinite amount as long as you go. You have, this is where you're talking about information overload. You have ballooned the overhead of the game immensely with this statement, because in theory, you would have to track all of this for the game to work properly. And now you set up a toxic situation because no one would do this. Like no DM would sit there and say, okay, it's 3:45 p.m. It's time for you to recast the spells. By the way, casting the spells takes 6 seconds. So there will be a slight interval of time that if you don't remember which ones you animate, which one you don't, there might be a 6 to 12 second interval where they're uncontrolled.
But I planned ahead of time. I drift backwards by 1 minute so that I have a whole minute of free time to cast it before they expire.
But eventually, right, but that starts the clock early. I mean, in other words, like what we're getting at here is if you were paying any attention to this, but obviously you're not going to, and a lot of people would tell me, Rafferty, why are you so bugged about it? And, like, the reason why I'm so bugged about it is because this is not the way you are actually playing the game. This is what I meant when Rob asked, like, we should be writing the rules, people actually play it. No one is really going to sit down and measure a clock and do all of this. They're going to improv or just bullshit their way around it. In which case,
they will abstract it out at least a little bit.
Right. Since no one is actually going to do it this way, it shouldn't be worded this way, because the opposite, if we actually do pay attention to it and do it the way they say in the book, makes the game worse.
It's not fun. That's the simple truth.
Right. It's not fun. No one would actually do that. but the weird thing is when I say it's a bad rule, and someone might say, well, no, it's not. Someone might actually want to do it. Look, you don't want to do it, and I don't want to do it. It's a bad rule. We're the only two people who matter. It's we wouldn't be having this discussion in an earlier version of D&D or in Pathfinder. It would just be double your hit dice, done, and we could just move on. And instead, that's an example of a rule that starts an argument. That's an example of bad design. We shouldn't have rules in the book that everyone eventually figures out they're not going to use.
All right, what do you guys got on that one?
I mean, you're totally right about it. And I think it seems like, again, I think like the fracture to all of this, where it comes to like, where does improv actually is appropriate, is in these instances where the rules or the context of the game part of what we're playing is the problem. And, we can improv through story, we can improv through narrative, we can find ways out of it and mitigate some of this. But those rules, those issues will always be there in some form. And even within the rules, there is always ways to, to fudge it or abuse it. I remember, oh goodness, it was a while ago. We're doing of all games, a Dragon Age game, tabletop game, where, I had to look into the rules of, well, how do Darkspawn how are they actually created? Because one player found himself on a ship filled with we'll call them kidnappers, because that sounds a little more PC, and decided, you know what, I got Darkspawn blood, I'll just poison their food, and that'll, I'll take care of them later. And he did. And they all turned into ghouls and darkspawn and things, because that's in the rules of the game, but it doesn't spell out like how long that takes. It doesn't say like there's like not an actual mechanic for it. So it's in like instances like where you
It's
have
in the lore somewhere, and you got to figure it out from there.
Yeah, that
exactly.
in fact was one of my issues with the Dragon Age role-playing game, was that even though, because the computer game doesn't have to do it, the computer game doesn't explain it, it's very scripted.
Yeah.
The computer game immunizes you to it, so you never have to deal with it.
The tabletop game
is one of the funniest things of, because I'm glad you brought that up, because I remember there was an optional rule in Dragon Age where casting a spell could turn you evil, because the lore says that there's a random chance that casting a spell turns you evil. But if you play the computer game, you can cast evil magic all you want, and it never does anything bad to you.
Oh wait, you said that was optional? Because it's not. It's actually baked into the mechanics.
Oh, it is mandatory? Well, then in which case, one of the things I discovered is, it happens if you roll like 3 1s or something. I think
it was 3 6s.
I calculated the odds on it. There is a 1% chance every time you cast a spell that you turn evil forever. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but remember, that means after 100 rolls, you're more than half likely to have been turned evil. You might cast a spell 5 times a round, so after 20 fights, good luck.
But like it's been like little things like that, though. Like, first off, that's like a characterization of the game itself, because it is trying to mimic a video game. But
it's not, because in the video game, you never turn evil.
That's true. You're right. The player character doesn't.
I mean, they say you might, but then you never. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. Realistically, the video game says all of these things are true, and then you play them and they're not. So the role-playing game, by taking the video game at face value, saying, well, there's supposed to be a chance of this, we should model it and kill your character. Like that's a weird thing going on. And also the problem is, in Dragon Age, it's a random chance. It's not proportional to the evil you use. And it's not like a counter that builds up. Like if I get 3 evils in a row, I turn. And if I wait long enough, it goes down. No, it's just a flat 1% chance every time you cast a spell, you become an NPC and are removed from the game.
And I think this probably hits upon a good thing. Every single RPG has some kind of focus, something it's trying to do, and probably doesn't actually cover literally everything that could possibly happen. A book that actually does is 500 pages long. It's called Hero System, and you don't want to play it.
Well,
at some point, you have to wait a second. Yeah, I know. I'm throwing down right there, but
Well, first of all, your page count's off because it's 600, and second of all, no one does it.
ah,
That's my complaint. No, a better example for that. Actually, I want to flip this around, saying there's usually the problem is that if we're talking about improv, I talk about improv techniques. More games should be based on like the model of Powered by the Apocalypse or Blades in the Dark, and be based on the model of this is how you improv. Describe the scene to all of your players, and then your player, if the scene is dark and cluttered, give your players bonuses if they invoke dark or cluttered in their actions. So they're not working in a vacuum, they're building on the story that's already here.
Yeah.
Very brute force example, but once again, but it's in the rules now, and also the rule is working with the story. I said the room was dark and cluttered. You guys, as players, worked with a dark and cluttered room. We're working together as story. It's not in a vacuum. You can also write rules that work against you, because the real poster child for what Griffin's talking about is Rolemaster, which is a game that I used to play for years. And Rolemaster had a similar problem that what Dragon Age had, which was there's a critical success table and there's critical fumbles. And these fumble results are in no way proportional to what the fuck you're doing in the game. Because, like, I played the game once where I spent an hour making my character, and the very first spell I cast, I rolled a critical failure, and my character falls into a coma. And like the very first spell. And it's just because it was just random. Now, obviously, the game master said, well, that's no fun. Let's ignore that. And once again, I'm right here with the argument. If that's... Who thought it was fun that the very first time you cast a spell, it kills you? Or
right. Like, even Warhammer isn't that, like, intense with, like, its dark magic, right?
Well,
if you do
Warhammer,
low-level stuff, you can barely get punished by it sometimes.
Well, I don't know about 4E and 3E, but 2E especially, because 2E looked like it took a page of the Rolemaster book, but they specifically set up in Warhammer that it escalates. At first level, the only thing spells can do to you is add insanity points, which is a slow train to death. But then as you level up, you get more dice, which includes doubles and triples, which are the events that could actually kill you. And then you can also learn dark magic, which is more dice to roll, which has bigger chance of killing you. But it escalates, and you can choose to roll fewer dice. I might not roll all my dice.
There's a safe period, a safe place where you can be and try to do things that aren't as big and boisterous as you could possibly do. But you can just play your character, not die immediately.
Right, and it escalates, and also it felt more in line with the story, because I always like dark magic, because the way you learn dark magic is one of the critical fumble results is, you understand now. Here's the gift of dark magic for free. You get more dice to roll now. Isn't that great?
Oh gosh.
It's only great if you actually. It's only great if you don't fail.
Right, but that's what I love about it, because it's a rule that feels more like what you want to do with the game. Magic is an evil, dark force in the game. Chaos magic is tolerated, but we know it can drive you nuts. And here's a rule in the game that invokes that. Hey, here's more dice to roll. You can choose not to. I mean, as a player, we know you just choose not to roll all of your dice, because as a player, restraint. I mean, but that is a rule that makes it feel like it's in the game, as opposed to what we're talking about with a game like Rolemaster or whatever, which is, I want to cast an information spell to find out about this. Coma, done. It's no one would want that. And I mean, I know the thing that I'm fighting against here as a designer is a lot of folks will say, well, no game can be what everyone wants. No game could deal with all that you want to improv. All true things. Stop. Next sentence. However, there are some, that doesn't excuse people from writing these kinds of rules that are demonstrably what no one wants.
So here's a question then. As a designer, if you're able to write the game with the rules in mind to try and mitigate the problems that you're saying in terms of how it's poorly designed, let's say, like you're talking about with Magic here, what would be the reaction then when players deviate from that anyway, and they find the loopholes, or they make arguments saying, well, this is how it's written in this way, but can we just use it this way instead?
Well, I want to get back to, like, I'm not saying that you can't improv, I'm not saying a solution. I mean, I'm saying that A rule has to have a demonstrable purpose for doing what it does. If the rule isn't helping anyone, or if the rule causes problems, then it shouldn't be there. So if someone, like, oh my God, the stupid peasant railgun thing where people say, there's no actual rule. It says we can't have a line of 1,000 people, and they all just hand an object to the person next to them, and zoom, it goes to the end of the line, at faster than light speed. It's like, like these kinds of situations, you'd have to line up a whole bunch of people. And also like this is irrelevant. This is not going to happen in my game. I am going to cast an information spell, and I am going to roll a fumble when I do it. That is going to happen. So it's also okay. It's better to write a rule that's really short if it's going to stop overhead. Like, I mean, the way people are realistic going to play the game. Like, for example, many old school games have long and involved healing rules. You only heal your level and hit points per day. You need to rest and have meals. Diseases can infect your character and slowly make your character inside out. Okay, you may notice that all this stuff I'm quoting, no one does this shit. No one keeps track of arrows in their quiver or how much food that they have. I mean, I'm sure someone's going to chime in and say, well, I do. But since a majority of people stopped tracking this kind of shit, I mean, we have jokes about encumbrance, about how people say, I can't track how much stuff I'm carrying. That's too much overhead. It's like if people want to play a game where they're not tracking everything that's in their pockets. I mean, D&D has a big sheet on it for your gear. Vampire, another big game, doesn't even have inventory on the sheet. And it's like, they set different policies. In Vampire, you have inventory, but there's not even a space for it on the character sheet. It's something we assume you will do at need. It's not that we don't say it's not there. They have rules for it if it is there, but they don't have a gazillion rules for it. They don't have light, medium, and heavy loads, and then burdens and penalties to your swimming check. They're not into that. That's not what their game is about. And it's okay if a player wants to tweak the rules a little bit and improv something that's there. I'm right now arguing from the design perspective. A rule that's in the game would have to be there because it's solving a problem or setting a theme for what the game is about to communicate that to players. Otherwise, it's filler and toxic at worst.
Do you think that maybe just by years of people playing the games that many of those rules have become filler as well? Because I'm sure the folks that are right... Oh, go ahead, Rabbit.
No, I was going to say, I think the specific issue with D&D specifically is that people are sold D&D with a... basically as a do whatever you want to write your own fantasy adventure with your friends, when it's actually been tacked onto a game that was very specifically about, hairy dudes dying in dungeons to trolls. And the modern audience doesn't want that. So D&D got by saying, hey, you don't have to play the game any of these ways. And as long as you're paying us, we're pretty much fine with you doing whatever you want. So that's where that rub is.
There's two spells. Oh, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. There's two spells in D&D that when people get to them, they wonder what the fuck these are for. Mass Morph. Do you guys know what Mass Morph is?
Actually, no.
I don't think I've ever
seen it. It's in every version of D&D. It's a spell that you cast it on a group of people, and it casts an illusion that makes them look like trees. While they're in this illusion, they can't move. And if any of them move, the spell is still against. All it does is make a group of people look like trees.
That's just silent image with extra steps.
Well, the first thing you would ask is, well, can it transform you into other things? No, just trees. This is Dungeons and Dragons. If we cast a spell on you, you're all underground in this room pretending to be trees. Well, you might ask, why is it there? Well, Red just hit the nail on the head. It's from the war game. Where in the war game, you would have all your troops on the battlefield. You could suddenly say, ha, this was not actually trees. It's my surprise legion who are now in your rear ranks. That's where it comes from. But they copy and paste it and put it in every edition of D&D.
Right. There's a lot
of... in the original war game.
The rules that everyone ignores are the rules that make the game of D&D work. And the game of D&D is about creeping into enemy territory getting ambushed by orcs and trolls. But like people want to use D&D to tell like political stories about negotiating with pirates on airships, which is fun. The game was not built to do that though.
I want to build on what you just said. No, the game is also about looting because there's another spell that confuses people. Why is this floating disc spell here?
The floating, the floating disc. Is it Lehman's floating disc?
Tensor.
Cool. I think in 5th edition they let you use it as a platform now.
Yes,
because in the old rules they didn't. They said you cannot put yourself on this platform. You can't ride around it. And even if you can't ride around
downhill.
Yeah, you can't sled downhill. It's like, what is it for? It's for carrying loot. They specifically list exactly how much weight in pounds it will actually carry. It's for loot. Its only purpose was to make looting easier, because if you're playing this Diablo style and your bag gets full, you might need to carry extra loot, so you cast the spell to carry more loot, which is more profit. And the reason why people don't understand it today is because people don't do looting anymore.
No, they don't. I mean, and you get people who will argue like, oh, if it's a game about being lost in the dark, then why do all of the races have night vision, dark vision? And it's like, well, because people want to play all of the monsters that they were killing in the first editions of the game, and most of those monsters were subterranean because you bumped into them in the dark. And the thing is that, like, yeah, now that kind of, it leads to the situation, right, where you have one human and one halfling player. You don't even have a halfling. You just have one human player. Everyone else has night vision, dark vision. I'm sorry, and Griff. So Griff and the human player, the new guy, they can't see in the dark, but the rest of the party has decided that, like, oh, well, we all have dark vision. If we don't light a torch, then we can, like, ambush people and we won't be ambushed ourselves. So you two just hold on to our tails.
Even more generally, I'm the halfling rogue. I can't see in the dark, but if I want to sneak, I need to not have a light source. So as a thing that I'm supposed to do, I now can't really do it because I'm just stumbling around in the dark.
Yes. And then what happens? There's another part of this that's also very interesting, because then what happens is you get into combat, because you're in a dungeon, you're going to have combat. And now you're in combat, 2 of your party members can't see, but the enemies can, and the rest of your party can. So every GM in that position with half a conscience says, okay, we're just going to ignore lighting rules completely, because the alternative is now to penalize these 2 players. Actually are detrimental to the experience of the game. That's the kind of stuff I mean.
Well, I can even double up on that, because you may have heard my complaint of, if you read the scripted encounter, like if you read the published adventures now, they're always careful to note what light sources are already in the room.
Yes.
Like it was that Pathfinder Kingmaker one where we go to the Goblin Castle, and the text made sure to explicitly mention that when we're in the Goblin Castle, there are torches on the wall burning so we could see.
I think that's the Lost Mines of Phandelver.
The monsters with night vision, who with blind sense lit torches and left them in there? Why though?
Does someone come around every few hours and relight these, asking, why is my job to come around here every few hours to relight these? And the reason why it's there is because it's in the computer game. And the computer game always has light sources. I mean, once again, I guess we'll brag on. I remember Skyrim, people were pointing out, you can play a Khajiit with night vision, but every dungeon in Skyrim has a pre-made torch already on the wall. You open the 500-year-old crypt, and there's a lantern.
Well, that leads to convenience, ultimately, and that's the whole point of stuff like that. It is there just to cater to, we don't have to worry about that rule anymore.
You want to hear Griff complain here? Dark Souls 2 was sold on the entire thought that, yes, it's going to be so dark, you have to have a torch. It's going to be harder now. And then as soon as they release, it's like, no, we've upped the brightness by like 500%. You don't need anything anymore.
Well, there's still that one level where you can't see the floor if you don't have a torch. They still have that.
Yeah.
I will, if I can play devil's advocate for a little bit.
Of course.
If you have a character or 2 that can't see in the dark, shouldn't that be a problem between the party dynamics to figure out how everybody can see them?
It should, but it never is the thing.
Here's what, if I can wrap all this up. What I'm getting at here is, like, these games make issues out of this. Remember, it's not just a note here that the dungeon is, this isn't like Spirit of the Century, which would have a note here saying it's dark. That means that if we have a borderline roll of pass fail, I might say, well, you failed because you couldn't see. Or it might be you can spend a story point to use the darkness in your favor. I hit you with an attack. I'll spend a story point so he misses. It's dark and he couldn't see me. Like that, boom. Improvised, very quick rule. It's when you have a page and a half devoted to something. It's the thing I like to call do not call up that which you cannot put down. If you're devoting like pages of rules to this, then you're telling people in the game, you're endorsing that you should look at this and find a way to manipulate this and do it. And that's the problem is more rules multiply mistakes because they might... It's that usual thing of, yeah, we tracked food the first day and then it was too boring, so we didn't do it. Or we were doing random wilderness encounters, but after the first one we were bored, so we stopped doing it. And then you wind up with a feedback loop that we've complained about in other stuff where because these rules were important to some things, but people don't actually do them, we didn't go through and fix all the other shit that depends on it. Like Dungeons & Dragons has a real crisis that it's supposed to be a game of endurance. Your torches are supposed to run out. Your spells are supposed to run out. You only have so much resources you can use while you're in the dungeon because you have to leave the dungeon to get out. But modern people who play the game, they just go in one room, kill everything in it, camp for 8 hours, get up, go to the next room. Or you have scripted adventures that are we go to this one place, have exactly one fight, and then leave. And the problem is the game's not balanced for that because players unload all their dailies on everything they need. Because it doesn't matter. A daily might as well be once every 5 minutes or once a fight because we're only having one fight today. And that breaks the game. And that's like, so then you get a feedback loop where because the game is broken, we better add more hit points to the monsters. Okay, now every fight takes 8 hours.
Yep.
Yeah, and to bring it back to like something we mentioned before, like the only play until level 12 stuff exists because after a certain point, you have like your level 15 caster. They have 6 castings of like prismatic spray a day. And they every time they cast it, they send 12 people to another dimension and turn another 7 to stone. You can't do one encounter with that and then be done with it. You can when you're level 1 to 3 and people will die after a single fight. Yeah, but you can't at that point.
I think there also needs to be an investor who don't set players up to fail. It's like you'll meet lots of people who say, I don't track individual hit points for every goblin because that's too much. So when you drop the fireball on 17 goblins, you know, either they have a hit point pool or just improvise how many are dead. That's fine. But now we're in the situation where we're playing a game where, you know, certain classes were supposed to be able to fight multiple times and multiple combatants. I mean, I've already been complaining that modern dungeon maps are really small and they keep lowering the combatants. Like as a fighter, you're supposed to be able to take on 17 kobolds. But some GMs will say, well, the overhead of maintaining 17 kobolds is too much. Now, a good game, like I guess it's been a while since I mentioned D&D 4. D&D 4 made a minion rule that was an official rule and put it in the game so we could do killing a whole bunch of guys real quickly. Modern games like D&D 5 took that out and make you track hit points for everyone individually, even though, you know, and the question is, should we be doing that? Shouldn't the game rules be written to make it easier for what you want to do? Every time you're improving stuff, we should be asking, why doesn't the game already do this? And I can understand, like, well, it might not because of other problems. Like, it might not because, you know, it might break something else or something like that. But we should be asking that because I think it's all too often that we just mentioned I can mention even more legacy features to these games. They're just like heaped on top of each other. We keep doing because the game did it before this. And it's not the game anyone is actually playing. That's your Mercer effect right there. Matt Mercer knows these rules back to front. I've seen him get quizzed on it, but you watch his show and he's not using them.
All right. So I think at this point, now's probably a good time to go ahead and let's get some concluding statements out of people. Rafferty, you've got a lot of this locked down.
That was my concluding statement.
Exactly. So I think you got this locked.
Killing it is that what the game tells you to have fun and then gives you a bunch of shit that isn't.
And what about you, Red? What do you have on this concluding thesis here?
I really haven't wrapped my head around the opening topic premise, honestly. I think there was a lot of really interesting stuff said today. Red's recipe for fixing low light vision stuff in D&D is dark vision just removes the penalty for seeing through dim light. It does not let you see through darkness. Boom. If you go underground, bring a torch. So.
And what about you, Rob? What do you got?
I mean, I'm more or less in agreement with a lot of what Norman was saying. The only caveat to a lot of this, though, is that the way this sort of like, again, this separation of the rules versus the action versus like what the player does. There will be times where things will have to be improv on the spot. There will be times where, the players, or excuse me, the GM will make up something to just keep the game going, and they'll just throw out rules. Everybody does that. They've been doing that since the 70s, really.
Mhm.
Like if I remember correctly, like a lot of those old school war games used to have an actual referee in them. That would set out. I guess the GM, the dungeon master, the GM, is supposed to be that in modern parlance now. But
Yes.
but
Some older games will still call him the referee.
yeah, but like even the GM, if they know the rules back and forth, if your goal at the end of the day is to have some fun with it, bending, breaking, eliminating the stuff that doesn't matter, your group. Hackmaster, to use that as the example, is written for very specific people. They're playing that game for a reason, because I'm gonna fall unconscious if I try to cast a spell at level 1 or whatever. I'm gonna get turned into giblets in the first combat. Those are the folks that are playing like Elden Ring right now or Dark Souls. You know what I mean?
No, I would contradict you on that. They're not playing that. They're playing EVE Online.
Even better example. But you get the idea where I'm going with this. Like there are
you and I are in agreement. As I said, the game shouldn't be filled with rules that don't do what we want. You're saying, well, there are people who want Hackmaster. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, there are.
Go
the
play
rules
it.
are doing what they want.
And if they're not playing Hackmaster, they're not doing what it wants. I guess then the situation will become, well, find somebody that can do what you want, or do it yourself in that regard.
Well, or find a game, because like you could run a political intrigue game in Hackmaster. It would be less than ideal.
Yeah, I mean, you can run a political intrigue game in anything, depending on how you do it. Less than ideal is probably going to be the way to go.
It's time for me to point out that on this channel, I have to repeat, on this channel, I've run the Fatal game. You guys can all go see it. Because everyone says it's the worst game ever, and some of you were laughing because you know what it is, but it's. I mean, the spoiler alert. I ran a political intrigue game using Fatal.
Yep.
Because that's how much annoys me the idea that a good GM can improv through anything. Well, guess what? I ran the world's worst role-playing game. And by the way,
it technically worked
twice.
And to go ahead and wrap this up, so you've mentioned don't call out that which you can't put down, and I think that applies to improvisation too, because at some point your players will surprise you with something that nobody thought about, and you have to figure out how it's going to handle, and what you say will set up their future expectations. So you either need to think carefully about what you're about to do, or B, explain to them that, hey, I did this on the fly. Let's talk about how we want to do this later on when you're not in the middle of the action. So that would be my advice for today. So let's go ahead and wrap this all up. That's it for today for Notes from the Aleph. We stream episodes bi-weekly Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can join us live on Twitch at twitch.tv/Ractus. We also stream and record weekly tabletop games at the same channel, and you can come join us when we start at 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sundays and Wednesdays. Norman Rafferty is a partner and writer for Sanguine Games. Check out sanguinegames.com, join us on Reddit and Twitter, and look forward to the upcoming Book of Quarrels Ironclaw expansion book. Don't forget to check out RedRabbit and book him for a game over on startplaying.games as RedRabbit. And don't forget to check out Robert here over at techraptor.net and read all of his wonderful articles. And of course, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and come see us all again. Until next time, everybody.